Good morning, everyone. As always, I am delighted and honored to be invited to speak to this group of experienced clinicians. I always learn a great deal from my research into the topic, and I hope to pass on some information to you that is useful to you in each of your practices. Now, today we are talking about artificial intelligence, which is defined as, and I note that this is a Google AI definition, the simulation of human intelligence in machines and software, enabling them to perform tasks that typically require human intellect. And the emphasis here is on artificial intelligence. Now, we've had discussions at this meeting talking about the diagnosis of tumors using AI, the lung tumors, the diagnosis or the use of AI in writing scientific publications. I very much enjoyed the first two speakers, and I appreciate the efforts of the translator in making the information more understandable to me. But you saw that with the lung tumor staging, this has become more complicated with more subsections. There are more potential molecular tests to be run. There are more treatments, oral and IV, and that these are things that are amenable to being kept track of by AI. The second speaker amply demonstrated that there are many different kinds of underlying patient morbidities. There are many pathogens, bacterial, viral, fungal. The bacterial ones often have different antibiotic susceptibilities, and we have many antibiotics with new ones coming onto the market all the time. However, while this is a topic of intense interest, much is not known about what role AI will play. I will tell you the bottom line in advance, and that is that clinicians who utilize AI will be held responsible for the outcome, especially if it's negative. However, the guidelines and laws defining this have not been written yet, and certainly it'll depend on whether the AI program was given a correct diagnosis, whether it was given correct information and instructions, was the AI usage mandated, for example, by a guideline or by the government or by a hospital. And so there's much to be determined about what happens with AI in medicine. Now, I want to go back to the history and show you some of the first computers. On the left-hand side is ENIAC from 1945, and it was a room-sized computer, one of the first computers that used electronically triggered mechanical relays. So when it was functioning, it sounded like a room full of people knitting. On the right-hand side, you see something from the Harvard Mark II computer of the same era. It stopped working one day, and the technicians found a moth had gotten into and jammed one of the relays, and you see a picture of the moth taped to the logbook with the comment that this was the first time that a computer had actually been debugged. But technology moved from punch cards and paper tape to vacuum tubes and transistors and more transistor equivalents on a chip. Input media has also changed, though I will point out the United States Federal Aviation Administration still uses floppy disks for some of its air control system. Now, what do traditional computers do well? Well, they keep track of large amounts of information. I had a friend who was the head librarian for a medium-sized university, and he says, people are amazed that we can keep an entire library on a single disk. But he said that is not the amazing thing. The amazing thing is we can search all the books at one time and do research, and it's a very powerful tool. So computers are good at processing sequential steps very quickly. And as I pointed out, Moore's law shows that computer chips are getting more advanced and smaller, and so the processing ability doubles every 2 years. But always remember the computer programmer's adage, garbage in, garbage out. If you ask the wrong question, provide the wrong information, you will get an answer that's not very useful. Now, is drawing insightful conclusions intelligence? We can argue about whether making a lot of money is a good goal in life, but I would propose that it is a difficult thing and it is something that you can quantify. So one table shows the results of Jim Simmons, who was an engineer who in the 1960s and 70s began compiling data on the price of gold and trade and so forth, and first on paper and later with calculators and finally with computers. He was able to amass a very large fortune by analyzing data very carefully. The picture is that of Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, who also is a nice person, I think. But he spent his youth reading guides on what companies were, how many employees, how much taxes they paid, how much raw material they imported, and he determined which companies he thought would do well over time. And over 40 years, his company is one of the richest in the world. It's worth $1.3 trillion. And if this were a country, it would be between Turkey and the Netherlands. But what about serendipity, which is the almost miraculous invention or conclusion that humans can make seemingly from nowhere? My favorite example is the Scandinavian physicist who was drinking beer in a bar. And as he looked up at his glass with the beer, he saw little bubbles forming at a flaw in the glass. And he said, well, if I can see bubbles in beer, can I not see subatomic particles creating bubbles in liquid helium? And he became the father of particle physics. So what situations does AI apply to the diagnosis and treatment of disease? Well, there's book knowledge, and anyone can pick up a textbook of medicine, but using it is much, much different. So that involves learning medicine. And we now acknowledge that practice guidelines are very good and help us treat patients quickly and efficiently and hopefully at lower cost. On the other hand, cookbooks, which avoid thinking or help trainees just get an answer without understanding, these are not good. Some examples are a third-year medical student was part of a team faced with a very complicated patient. The patient had fever, a large spleen, but also mental status changes, skin rash, various organ system dysfunctions, and the team was very puzzled. And the medical student said, "This is endocarditis." And 3 days later, after many tests, they diagnosed a very rare form of endocarditis. So they asked the student, "How did you know?" And the student says, "Well, nothing else causes fever and a big spleen." Another situation you faced is you have trainees in our system. Third-year medical residents are in their final year of training, and they are generally very good. 99 times out of 100, they will make the correct diagnosis, choose the correct treatment. However, they become so confident that they see a patient, they say, "I know what this is," and their overconfidence will lead them to make a misdiagnosis and a wrong treatment plan. Now, interestingly, Alan Turing, who was a cryptanalyst and computer programmer, in the 1950s proposed the Turing test, which meant, could you tell if something you were communicating with was a human being or not? And in his time, he probably meant written messages. Now, of course, we have artificial voices, computer-generated voices, computer-generated imagery, and it's enough to trick some grandparents when they get a panicky call from their child, supposedly. It's been enough to trick the financial officers at corporations to send a big check for millions of dollars to a scammer because they have received a video call from their investor or CEO that they think is real. So where does quantum computing fit into this? And you see one of my favorite movies, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Well, all of you have been in situations where you are telling your trainees, this patient will not do well. We must watch them more closely. We must be ready for complications. How do you know that? I remember many, many decades ago when I was an infectious diseases fellow walking through the Yale New Haven Hospital Emergency Department, and a resident said, Hans, look at this x-ray. This is a very bad case of aspiration pneumonia. And I looked at it and I said what probably all of you would have said. I said, yes, that's a very bad chest x-ray, but I would think about tuberculosis and I would institute precautions. And it turns out I was right, and I became known as the fellow who could diagnose tuberculosis in 3 seconds, but it was pattern recognition, inflammatory changes, and a little bit of experience. So quantum computers are different from regular computers because regular computers in their transistors have on and off. Quantum computers have everything in between. So it can evaluate hundreds or thousands of pathways all at the same time, making it a much more powerful machine. It's very fast, and it can also be relatively compact. However, they're very expensive. The chips from NVIDIA are extremely costly. But the Chinese company DeepSeek claims they've created an alternative using many smaller, simpler chips, and they claim it is as good as something like ChatGPT. Another problem is it uses a great deal of energy, and because these computers are so powerful, they can crack the encryption of most programs. So we've had many hospitals in the United States who've had their data stolen, encrypted, and then a ransom demanded for the encryption key. Now, what are some potential problems with quantum computers? Well, will they put people out of work? And the answer, of course, is yes. If you do an internet search now, often the first line will be AI suggests or AI indicates that. If you were an advertising copywriter who was selling refrigerators or cars, your job is at risk because AI can do this very quickly and very efficiently. Even many creative professions like graphic designers, actors, producers are worried that once their image is on film or video, that their images can be used to create new movies and shows with computer-generated imagery with them not being paid for their work. So what are the thought processes of AI? Because this is very important to medicine. If you were going to a new city and learning how to drive different places, you would look at the map, you would say, I can take this route or this route or this route. You would try them out, you would say, well, this is quick, this route is more pleasant, more scenic, now there are repairs here, or in busy times you avoid this, and you would learn how to drive in a new city. But researchers asked AI to look at a map of Manhattan Island in New York City and to apply these learning principles to choosing routes, and AI just kept choosing thousands, millions of routes. Some went through buildings. Some cut across Central Park where there were no roads. And eventually it settled on patterns, and it's very accurate in giving you driving directions, but the way it got there is very difficult to understand. Now, the real problem in my mind is that computers can cause hallucinations. As I said, the original computers did things one step at a time, yes, no, and every once in a while, rarely, we think the electron spin state was caught in the middle. And then the computer didn't know what to do, so it would stop or give you a wrong answer, but very, very rare. Now with AI, the computer gives you a made-up answer, a false answer. And there was a lawyer writing a case brief. He asked AI to choose case precedents to cite, and the judge and the opposition found that some of these cases didn't exist. And now there are over 100 cases in the legal profession in the United States. So why does AI make up things that don't exist? We don't know. It may be because it's trying to fulfill its programming and give you an answer, but it disregards reality and data in order to do so. Now, AI in science and medicine, you've seen examples at this meeting that AI is very good in reading radiographs because information like density and location can be digitized and analyzed. My cardiology friends are very fond of using colors and flow dynamics for echocardiography and so forth. And this is also subject to reading and analysis by artificial intelligence. AI in drug discovery will be huge. Not only can we now look at new compounds, and whereas all drug companies will test new compounds for an anti-cancer screen and an antimicrobial screen, as well as whatever their intended use is. Now this can be done by AI in a simulation without involving test tubes or expenses. It can also screen old drugs for new uses, and this is huge because we know these old drugs. Maybe they were used for malaria, maybe they were used for arthritis, and we know their dosages, we know their toxicities, and yet now AI can try them in molecular fitting to see if they might treat other completely unrelated diseases. It can create theoretical diseases for active sites in the human body or avoid those active sites to minimize toxicity. And because we now have mapped the human genome and are understanding the variants and know many pathogens, for example, or cancer genotypes, AI can use genetics and immunotherapy to develop new therapies. Now, in my field, infectious diseases, we hope to speed up the diagnosis and treatment of infections. But in the 1990s, a chemical company came out with a process using thin film to automate some of these processes in testing for pathogens. But we said as clinicians, that's nice, but it doesn't help us because it gives us the answer in the middle of the night. Who's going to act on it? And now, of course, with PCR, monoclonal antibody, gene probes, and often in sequence, some of these tests can be done in minutes, whereas they used to take days to identify an organism with resistance pattern. So hopefully AI will help diagnose and treat infections, guiding clinicians. But again, we must make sure the information is given to the correct individuals who have the ability to think, is this acceptable? Is this within guidelines? Is this something that truly is determined by the severity of illness? Some specific examples from pulmonary medicine, and you've already heard some from the other speakers. If you look at this, it's looking at many chest x-ray images, and it can process these and add layering and filtering and diagnose them. And in the end, you see it diagnoses normal chest x-ray, pneumonia, fibrosis, even asthma. And I think one of the strengths is not just doing this quickly, because all of us can do this quickly, but with so many steps, it's difficult. And do we remember all the steps? Number two, it can tailor it. It can say, well, we can look at the country as a whole for comprehensive data. We can look at a region or a hospital for local data, and it can update this quickly as patterns change. So with COPD, for example, we all look at pulmonary function tests, x-rays, the patient's performing status. AI can do this quickly. It can predict exacerbations. So it not only looks at the current testing and radiographic and other evidence, but it looks at intrinsic factors like other comorbidities like heart failure. It looks at extrinsic factors that we may or may not think about. For example, vaccination status, the weather, air pollution, various infectious pathogens that are going around the area. It can plan discharge from the emergency department more efficiently and quickly, and also prevent readmissions. So it may flag a patient for more careful follow-up with telephone calls or visiting nurse support. And unfortunately, it can also predict mortality data, and again, we hope with the intent of improving results. So where we're left is the AI balancing act. Will we go down the right pathway to Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Terminator, where AI decides that human beings should not exist and seeks to destroy us? Or is it the other pathway where there's researchers are saying, well, they don't want to take over. They just want to dance. And it appears that the answer will be somewhere in between. So putting it all together, how should we in this room approach AI, both in general living and also in your practices? Well, there's a good article from JAMA last year that says, well, treat this like any new development and approach it logically. Focus on the clinical use or indication. What are we trying to do with this AI program? Not just make medicine better or diagnosis better, but making tumor classification more accurate, or finding a infectious pathogen and its resistance pattern sooner, so that antibiotics can be will more likely be correct. Then test it in a protocol, just as you might a new drug or a new device. And this means decide what the potential benefit is. If this is something that will help all patients with autoimmune disease, it's probably a very good thing. If it's something that may or may not be helpful in a very small subset, you might go more slowly to define who benefits. And then finally, look carefully at the evidence. Good evidence would be multiple randomized clinical trials or multiple meta-analyses that say this way is better. Train AI to look at this. Or it might be at the other end, just expert consensus, case studies, standard of care, which is desirable, but perhaps not absolutely certain, and maybe AI should be employed to look at more approaches, more outcomes, to refine the issue, to make the diagnosis and treatment better. So what are my conclusions and suggestions? Well, there have been tremendous advances in computers and software just over a human generation, and I think I am the human generation. I saw paper tapes and punch cards go to solid state drives, and I saw simple computers, very slow, in fact, move to smartphones, and pretty soon we'll have quantum computers that drive many things in life and medicine. Computers are so fast now that they're capable of passing the Turing test, I'm sure. So that if you are confronted with a issue, say that your child calls from the highway, supposedly, and says, I have a flat tire, I have an engine problem. Can you wire me money to fix it? It's an emergency. And it sounds like your child, and you know they're traveling, but is it really them? So now you probe more carefully. What's your favorite food? Where do we go on vacation? And you ask the same questions in research in AI and medicine. Quantum computing will move things along very quickly. So things we thought were moving rapidly will become much faster. But always remember, AI can make mistakes and hallucinate data. So therefore, in all fields, especially medicine, AI must be watched, it has to be guided, and it has to be taught always by human beings. So my question to all of you today is, are you ready for the future? Thank you.